Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong says the standards of his ruling People's Action Party have not slipped after two of his MPs stepped down and resigned from the party over what's been described as an inappropriate relationship. Chuan-Jin quit as Speaker of Parliament and as MP for Marine Parade GRC, while Cheng ended her stint as MP for Tampines GRC. There are now 3 vacant PAP seats, with former Senior Minister Tharman Shanmugaratnam having stepped down to run for president, and Transport Minister S. Iswaran's future is also uncertain amid a corruption probe. But Mr. Lee said this will not trigger a general election now, as other MPs in the affected constituencies will ensure residents are looked after.
There is such a thing as appropriate or inappropriate behaviour, propriety and impropriety. And we expect our MPs and certainly ministers to know the difference. But in dealing with these situations, which are human situations, you also have to be cognizant of human frailties and conscious of the impact that our actions will have on innocent parties, on families, on spouses, on the children, and deal with them as sensitively as you can, but upholding our fundamental requirement to maintain our responsibilities and our trust with Singaporeans.
Mr. Lee also says the resignations of the 2 PAP MPs were necessary to maintain the high standards of propriety and personal conduct that the party has upheld all these years. Geraldine Yap with more.
A rare event at the Istana. A media conference called by Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. He addressed what he described as an inappropriate relationship between Mr. Tan and Ms. Cheng.
It saddens me to discover that these 2 PAP MPs have fallen short of the high standards of propriety and personal conduct that we expect of all PAP MPs.
Mr. Tan is the second Speaker of Parliament to step down over such an incident. In 2012, Michael Palmer resigned as Speaker following an affair with a People's Association staff member.
I just want to ask a few questions around timing.
Yes.
You mentioned that you had this conversation with Mr. Tan in February.
Yes.
It's not clear to me how long this relationship had been going on when you had that conversation with them, first. Second, the timing when you dealt with the Michael Palmer incident suggests quite a different timeline.
Yes.
Far more quick and abrupt.
Yes.
And third, on timing, now that you have 4 vacant seats in Parliament, does that affect the way you think about when you're going to call the next general elections?
Well, I spoke to Speaker Chuan-Jin and Cheng most recently in February. I learnt of this sometime after the last general election in 2020. I do not know when it began, but they were spoken to, counselled. Unfortunately, the matter didn't close, and so it came to the conversation, the hard conversation we had in February this year. As for comparison with Michael Palmer, I think it depends on the situation of the case. As I said, you've got to look at the circumstances, at the spouses, at the family's conditions, at how you can manage this as sensitively as you can and yet do your duty. And it depends on the person's response as well as the specifics. So I don't think it is possible to make direct comparisons. As for the general election, I have no plan to call an immediate general election. A general election is due by 2025. We are in the second half of the present government's term. We've just opened Parliament recently. We have a full agenda for this term. We are working at it, and that's what we will focus on. And in the GRCs where there's a member missing, the other members of the GRC will step up and will make sure that the constituents are well looked after. That's one of the advantages of having a GRC.
Mr. Lee says Mr. Tan offered to resign in February and he accepted the resignation. But the Prime Minister said he needed time to ensure that Mr. Tan's constituents will continue to be taken care of. Mr. Lee said he told Mr. Tan again that the relationship has to stop. But he later found out that the relationship continued. Thus, he decided that Mr. Tan had to quit immediately.
If the behavior is not outrageous or scandalous to begin with, and the MP heeds the advice, corrects it, makes amends, puts a stop to what should not happen, then we will not punish them severely and automatically kick them out or immediately kick them out. Because what you do and what consequences the person should face also depends on the positions they hold and other factors, the circumstances, the family situations, how inappropriate or egregious the behavior was.
The resignations are the latest in a string of high-profile issues involving PAP MPs recently. These include the corruption probe that saw Transport Minister Iswaran arrested. Mr. Lee said no system can be completely infallible. He stressed that these cases are not an example of PAP's slipping standards, but rather how the party deals with allegations against its MPs.
In Mr. Iswaran's case, the matter came up not from any external report, but because CPIB came across the issue while doing another investigation, and they told me. I said, check it out. After a few months, they came back to me. They said, there's something to this. We want to open a formal investigation. I studied their paper. I said, yes, proceed. And that's what they have done. And it will go through to its full conclusion.
He added that in the case of Mr. Tan and Ms. Cheng, efforts were made to get them to put things right. When that didn't work, they had to go.
That's how the system has to function. Sometimes things cluster up, but we make sure we put them right, and I hope I put them right, and we will be able to set the right tone for a long time to come. Because you are not just maintaining high standards for one election term or one generation of leaders. You have to make sure that you can maintain this, sustain this, feel that sense of mission and responsibility, and be able to transmit that beyond your term into the next generation and imbue the next generation of people who come forward to serve, as well as people who grow up as mature Singapore citizens and voters, to understand that this is how our system works and this is how it has to work in order for Singapore to succeed.
Earlier today, Mr. Tan and Ms. Cheng submitted their resignation letters to PM Lee. They apologized to residents and the party. In his letter, Tan Chuan-Jin said he made a mistake by uttering words that were rude and unparliamentary in nature, adding that some had called for his resignation. He said that he should have known better as Speaker and that his mistake raised questions over his neutrality. He then said that the credibility of Parliament cannot be compromised. Further down the letter, Mr. Tan said that the recent episode added to the hurt he caused his family. He said he had let them down. While Mr. Tan did not go into details, he said that he had discussed the matter with his wife and had agreed to devote himself to his family. Ms. Cheng wrote in her letter that she is sorry to be resigning in these circumstances, but she did not elaborate. Ms. Cheng is not married. Welcome back to News Tonight. More now on the resignation of two PAP MPs after both were found to have had an inappropriate relationship. One is Speaker of Parliament Tan Chuan-Jin, the other MP for Tampines GRC Cheng Li. Mr. Tan is a former Brigadier General turned politician, and we take you through his political career over the past decade or so.
Mr. Tan made his political debut in 2011 as part of a 5-member PAP team contesting in the Marine Parade GRC. It won by more than 56% of the vote, and Mr. Tan went on to represent the GRC's Kembangan Chai Chee ward. In 2012, he was appointed Senior Minister of State for National Development. 2 years later, Mr. Tan was promoted to full minister, helming the Manpower Ministry. And in a cabinet reshuffle in 2015, he changed portfolios to become the Social and Family Development Minister. At the 2015 GE, Mr. Tan and his team retained the seats with more than 64% of the votes. He continued to lead the Social and Family Development Ministry. In 2017, Mr. Tan stepped down from the cabinet. He took on a new role as the country's 10th Speaker of Parliament, succeeding current Singapore President Halimah Yacob. At the last general election, Mr. Tan's team went up against candidates from the Workers' Party and won with a 16% margin. He continued to serve as Speaker up until his resignation on Monday. Prior to his foray into politics, Mr. Tan served in the Singapore Army between 1987 and 2011, where he held the rank of Brigadier General. He has also been the President of the Singapore National Olympic Council since 2014.
Cheng Liu-hui's resignation ended a political career that spanned 8 years. Most know her as an MP for Tampines GRC. And here's a look at her political journey. Ms. Cheng made her political debut in 2015. She was elected as an MP for Tampines GRC, helmed by then Education Minister Heng Swee Keat. 5 years later, Ms. Cheng was re-elected, representing the Tampines East Division. During these 8 years, Ms. Cheng also held leadership roles within the ruling party. In 2016, she was appointed Deputy District Advisor in the PAP Women's Wing. The former MP was previously a businesswoman. An analyst we spoke to says Prime Minister and PAP leader Lee Hsien Loong must give further details on why the matter was allowed to drag on for at least 3 years. He says it should not be business as usual, as half the battle will be persuading the public that the party is taking sufficient measures to deal with any problems on discipline and conduct of its MPs.
They will have to relook how they enforce party discipline. How do they ensure, that MPs keep to the party's set of rules of prudence, that Mr. Lee as a party leader had set up for them. And it also raises questions, as to how the PAP selects its candidates, for political office as well as for Parliament.
To boost public confidence, Mr. Tan adds that the PAP will have to ensure that residents in the affected GRCs have their needs and concerns looked after, and that means more engagement on the ground with trusted leaders.
We should perhaps expect, the PAP to deploy perhaps retired MPs, to help out the existing MPs who are covering, for their former colleagues. And we shouldn't also be surprised if the ruling party were to deploy veteran activists from other constituencies, to help out in the affected GRCs.
Culture, Community and Youth Minister Edwin Tong was seen at the Meet the People session at Kembangan Chai Chee this evening. He's covering for his former colleague Tan Chuan-Jin. CNA spoke to him about Mr. Tan's resignation.
Not now, not at this point in time. Okay, I'm going to see some of the other grassroots and activists at KCC, so I have no comments at this point in time. Okay.
For the residents. Anything to reassure residents that...
Cal, I'll just make one other point. Okay, I think it's important that we have stability, and my colleagues and I will continue with the good work that's been done here, and we'll ensure that our priority is the well-being and care for the residents at KCC.
Mr. Tong arrived at this block after 6 in the evening and was seen speaking to residents. CNA was not allowed in those sessions. Nearly 20 residents showed up to speak to Mr. Tong before he left at 8 p.m.